Hey guys, this is Mike, and GenerateBlocks came out yesterday, the alpha version. And I'm going to run through the blocks really quick and how you can use them. I'll try and keep this as short as possible. So let me just jump into the page that I have. I set up this new page. I made a GeneratePress layout element that turns off the content title and sets the page to full width, page builder full width. So that's why this headline you can see here is dimmed out. I'm not going to use an element header. I'm going to just build out things with using the blocks just to give you a better idea of what you can do. All right, so if you haven't used Gutenberg, I'll probably throw in a couple tips along the way. I'm actually loving it lately, especially with the GenerateBlocks. And I used to hate Gutenberg, but with the blocks, you're going to kind of have to jump in now. And I think when you do, you'll realize how powerful the GenerateBlocks are. And I've been recreating pretty much everything I've wanted, things I've built with page builders and layouts and landing pages using the GenerateBlocks. There's pretty much endless possibilities. So if I go into the block manager, I pretty much turn off every single Gutenberg block. You'd be amazed what you can do with just the 4 GenerateBlocks. The ones I do add because you need them are going to be the paragraph and the image. If you wanted to add like quotes and stuff, you could add that. But as you go through, and once you start using GenerateBlocks, you'll realize you don't need most of the blocks that it comes with. I'm using the Gutenberg plugin as well. I'm not using the one that ships with WordPress. It's a little different. I like it better, but it's totally preference up to you. Okay, so first off, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in adding a container block. So a container block is basically going to be what I'm going to use to make a full width background photo. And you can think of the container as kind of the wrapper of all your content in a certain section. So imagine a hero section on a web page that would all be inside a container. And then if you scroll down, there's like an About Us or info boxes type section that would be inside a container. So as I build more containers, you'll see how it works in the block navigation, which is kind of, it's like the holy grail in my opinion. I go to the block navigation all day to figure out where I'm at and to grab what I need to grab. And I'll show you as we add more stuff. So as of right now, I have a container and I can go ahead and I could add a background image in it, and I'll just do that really quick. And over here, I'll add some spacing. Let's do 200. Let me just launch my preview page, and now I've got this big full width photo. When you click on the container up here in the block navigation, you'll notice a lot of the settings are going to be similar on all the blocks. You're going to have desktop, which is default. You're going to have tablet and mobile settings. So you could have separate, pretty much separate everything. If you go through even the typography, you'll notice once we get in there what you can do. You're going to have colors such as background color, text, links, borders. You can do background gradients. You can do color overlays. You can position the photo wherever you want. You can set it to fixed if you want to do like a parallax type thing. Pretty much if you've ever used a page builder, it gives you all those options. And so let's say, for example, I wanted to add a little gradient on top of the photo. Let's start off with like a white and start it at like 20%. And then I'll just grab like let's go black. Let's just stay monochromatic and do like a 70. And I'll stop that at 100%. And make sure this is checked. See background image. You need to make sure the overlay button is selected. All right, so now you see I have this kind of opaque gradient on the background. And I'm gonna darken up this side. And then I'm going to lighten up the white a little bit. And then that'll be good. And because I'm going to put the headline over here, and I got this cliff over here, I'm actually going to kind of spin the gradient, and you could do that by changing this right there, and that looks kind of good. And let's see what we got. All right, so I've got this little gradient going from left to right, and let's make it a little more like that. All right, so now that I have this container, if you wanted to, you could just add a headline block right here. So basically the hierarchy would be container headline block. I'm going to go ahead and first, I'm going to wrap the headline in a grid, and I'll show you why. So let me go ahead and just add a grid, which is basically like your columns. It's how you're going to set up all your responsive stacking and everything. And I'm just going to do a one column grid. All right, so now I have a container, and then I have a grid. And you'll notice here there's another container, and basically when you add a grid, it's going to give you an empty container for each column. So if I had selected a 3-column grid, I would have 3 empty containers here. And if you're not familiar with the block editor or Gutenberg, this is why I say just stick with the block navigation, and it'll kind of explain itself. If you just follow the little, the little branches, you could see how your content kind of stacks down and what's connected to what. All right, so now that I have this grid and I have a container, I can go ahead and I'm going to put a headline inside of that. So I'll grab this headline. I've got some dummy text I'll grab here really quick. And because I turned off my content title with that element, my page has no H1, so I'm going to make that my H1. And I'm going to update it. And all right, so I've got this H1, and the font and the type size is actually being controlled by GeneratePress in the customizer. I haven't in your normal typography settings. But let's say I wanted to change this. You can go ahead and when you click on the header block, you're going to get all these options on the right. And here I'm going to click Show Advanced Typography. And this is where you can change the font. You can change the size, line height, letter spacing, as well as all these other options, which are kind of universal to like the headline and the button and the icons as well, spacing, colors. So let's just say I'm going to make this headline big, and let's do 60. All right, so I got this big headline, and the reason I used a grid is because I want to control where the line break is. So say I had a photo with like a person over here or something. I want to be able to control my headline on all 3 devices and where the text drops and where it sits inside that section. So let me go back to the container that's holding my headline. And as of right now, default again is desktop. It's at 100%. I'm going to change it to 50. So that means the container holding this headline is only going to be 50% the width. It's kind of similar if you use page builders to doing like a 2-column row and you leave 1 column empty to control where the text breaks. All right, so now I've got this little block of text over here, and let's say I wanted to get the word by down to the next line. Let's say I did it at 45% width. Let's try that. There we go. So that's how you can kind of control your headlines and how they break, and that's why I added a grid. If I just added the headline in the container, to do this I would have to do it kind of the old way where you add a ton of right padding on the headline itself. But I wanted to do it this way because now I can also go in, select that container, and let's say I want the headline to be full width when it hits tablet. So I'm going to select 100 there, and then mobile is going to default to 100 anyway. So this headline then it'll sit here like this, but when it hits tablet, it'll use the full width of this little section. So this is kind of the premise of the stacking order. You're going to get a container. Think of your container as like a row. If you've used a page builder, this should come pretty naturally to you, to be honest. The grid is going to be pretty much your columns. And then as you add content into each column, you're going to get another sub-container holding that content. Now, the button block, if I wanted to add a button under this headline, I would add a block and I'm going to click on a button. you're going to get a button here, and then you'll notice there's a little plus sign because the button comes as kind of a two-pack. So you've got one button, two button, and if you look at the navigation, there's also this upper level button. Basically what this is the container, the button container. It's the same as the container that's holding my headline. The buttons have their own little container. And you'll notice the settings on the right over here will change when I click on the button container. It's going to give me the option to center them, add margin around the two of them. I could either stack them vertically. I could fill the space that they're in. So say you had a pricing table, you could do like a full width button, the width of each table. And now if I click on each individual button, you'll see it goes back to all the other settings like the headline has. And if I didn't want them touching, I could just add a little padding to the right of that button. And then you can have that. Now when I go back to the button container, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and change basically the, imagine you had buttons that were left justified, but then on mobile you had sometimes like you'll center content. Then you could just go ahead and you could align the buttons on the center for mobile. So basically you have desktop, tablet, and mobile settings for pretty much every element in the GenerateBlocks. So as you go through them and start messing with them, think about how you want everything to look on desktop versus tablet versus mobile. All right, so I have a button here. I'll just remove that one. As far as the button styling, I can go ahead, I can add an icon to it, like this little caret, and you could decide which side you want it on. So I'll choose the right. You could do anything with the buttons really as far as color. You can do background gradients, click use gradient, and then you would just go in here and set your two gradient colors. Let's say I did red and yellow, and say I wanted the angle to be a little more like that. You could do something like that. The icon also, the button besides buttons, this is how you're going to do all your social icons also. So let's say I was doing social icons and I clicked Instagram. You're going to go ahead then and just click remove text, and it becomes a social media icon. And what you can do is get rid of this back. If you like this, you can do it that way. You can jump into the spacing and control the border radius. And these are going to be all separate values. So you can do something like, one rounded corner. If you wanted a rounded button, you could do like 40 all around. Let me try 50. And here's one thing you should note. When you're trying to make a round button, see how it's kind of oblong? That's because the padding that I was using on the button is not even. So if you're using uneven padding, you're going to get like an oblong button. So if I make them all 20, then you're going to end up with a perfect circle. And say I wanted the icon to be a little bigger, you're going to do that under the typography, and you could just control to get your icon however big you want. And if you just wanted the icon, you could go into the colors. You could turn off that. You could change the background to, you just clear it out basically. Same with the hover background color. Clear it. Say I make the background yellow on hover. Oops. I meant to make the icon. All right. So the text will be the color of the icon, like that. And then let's say the hover would be whatever color, so you'd have that. So you can do it with or without backgrounds. You can make any type of shape you like, and then you can always obviously duplicate it and make a whole row of social icons. All right, so let me just show you the grid and how good it works. So I'm going to make a new container, and I'm going to go and make a 3-column grid. All right, so if I were to make, let's say And I'll grab that container and I'm just going to add some padding. All right. So if you had 3 different columns with different content, you would just go ahead and build them. But a lot of times, like info boxes and pricing tables are the same. So what we want to do is just build one and then duplicate it. Now the fact that I have 3 columns here, if I build one and duplicate it, it's going to make a 4th column and then a 5th column. So when you're duplicating columns like this or containers, you're going to have to remove the other ones or they're just going to be extra. So what you could do is, if you see here's grid, here's my 3 containers, 1, 2, 3. You could just delete these and it won't affect the width of the first one. So now this one is still at 33% and it's leaving me room to duplicate it twice. So you can do it that way. Another way to do it is just add a 1 column container or use the grid and add a 1 column and then just go ahead and make it 33%. Either way, it's the same thing. So if I have if I say I wanted to make a little info box and I do a headline and I say hello, and I've got some text below it maybe. I've got some dummy text I can grab. And I'll drop that in here. And this is where I'm going to use the Gutenberg paragraph block. And then let's say I want to use another button down here and click update. So say I have this little info kind of box right here and I want to duplicate it. All I would do is, you can select it 2 different ways. You can kind of click outside of it a little bit and you'll be able to, but you see I'm grabbing the whole container here. I just want this 1 container grid. And you see how it's kind of tricky? There, I got it that time. So this is why I say keep going back to this block navigation, because if you haven't used Gutenberg, wherever you click, it's going to show it with a gray background. So it's telling you, okay, you're clicked on this paragraph. So if I want to grab this container, I will know that this right here, based on the way it's branching out, this container is controlling all of this. Because sometimes when you've got a lot of content, especially if you're nesting columns, it's hard sometimes to get to select what you want. So it's easiest to just go up here and select it. And now what I could do is I just can go ahead and duplicate it. So I'll go to this guy, grab that container, and I'll duplicate him. And then you're going to have your 3 little info boxes. All right, so the great thing about the grid is, let me go up and select my grid. So here's the container, here's the grid, and then here's my 3 info box containers. So when I click on the grid, you're going to see this gap. All right, the gap is the space between. So let's add some space between these guys, and then you could change it for tablet and mobile. The vertical gap is what's going to control the space from top to bottom in between elements. So if I were to have more, say I had another row of these, the vertical gap that were still in this container, the vertical gap would control that. So say I put like a little call to action headline here, I could use vertical gap to push it down a little bit. Since I don't, I'm going to leave that at 0. And I'll show you when you want to use it. Now I've got 3 columns here, and just for example, say I didn't want to use 3 on tablet, but I didn't want to make all 3 full width. So let's say I wanted this first one on tablet to be full width, kind of like a featured info box. And then I could grab this one here, and let's say on tablet I wanted that to be 50%. And say on this one here, I wanted this one on tablet to be 50%. I can click update. Now I can go back here and jump into the preview. And when I click on tablet, you'll see I'm going to have the first one, and then these guys are going to be 50% each. But you'll notice here these are basically touching. That's where the vertical gap comes in. So I'm going to go back to the grid that's controlling all 3. And I don't need it on desktop because there's nothing under it, but I do need it on tablet. So I'm going to set the vertical gap on tablet to be 60. And then here you go. And then you'll get a nice 60 pixel gap. Same as the 60 horizontal one I have set for these. So that's how you're going to want to use the vertical gap. And if you look at the way these work, whatever you have set for default, if you have no values entered in tablet or mobile, they'll pick up what's above them. So if on desktop I have horizontal gap at 60, and then on tablet I have nothing, tablet and mobile will get 60. If I change it on tablet to 40, mobile will get what tablet set it as. So it's just kind of a hierarchy. The guy above you, if you have no value, that's what you're going to inherit. All right, so I have this little box here, and one of the things, especially if you're not familiar with Gutenberg, is how to reuse content, which saves you a ton of time. And all right, so I have this, I go to the outermost container up here, and I have my little info box row. And let's say I want to use this on another web page. You're going to just go ahead and add to reusable blocks. And I'll name it, info boxes, and save it. Okay, now when I go up here into the menu and I click on Manage All Reusable Blocks. Oh, let me save this first. And now I'll go to open that in a new window. You'll see I have info boxes. So basically, if you've used a page builder, this is the same premise as global. So if you have a global row or a global button, this is the same thing. So anything that's connected, because what happened was I turned this into a reusable block, okay? And now you'll see it's basically a reusable block on this page. I would leave this as a reusable block if it was something that I knew was never going to change. Or, all right, say you had a email sign up form row and you knew you wanted it the same on every single page. You could do that and then just go ahead and add that block to this page. So, if this was a new page, you would click, go to the bottom, go to reusable, and then there's your info boxes. And then you could just drop it on that page just like that. Okay, so the one warning is if you leave it as a reusable block, if I were to edit this in the reusable block section, it's going to edit it on any of the other locations that reusable block is in. Okay, so you see there. So that's kind of the whole global premise. If I save this as for a button example, like a button you can't really leave because you're going to want to change the URL in it each time. You might want to change what it says in the button. So if I had a button that I really liked, like this one, say I had this button and I went up and I selected the button container, because you want to select the actual button container. And I said, I want to use this social icon on another page. I'll add it to reusable blocks, and I'll just call it, Instagram or something. And now that this is tied to that reusable block, I don't want it to be. Say I want to change this color on this page or something, or I just don't want it tied to that reusable one. You're going to want to convert it back to a regular block. And that breaks the tie to your reusable block section. So if you're familiar with how global stuff works with page builders, you'll understand that. Because, all right, let me show you. If I were to, here's my one info box that's reusable. You could tell it says reusable block, and it'll give the name of it here, info boxes. All right, now this one, I'm going to release it. So I'm going to convert it to a regular block, and you'll notice now it has the normal menu items as opposed to this one with the reusable info boxes one. All right, so this one's released, and this one's still tied to the reusables. So I'll click update. All right, so when I go back to manage all my reusable blocks. If I trash this guy by accident and then go back, you'll notice it trashed that first instance which was still tied to it. So just keep that in mind. It's I save out, I've built so far a lot of Gutenberg and GenerateBlocks like rows that I commonly use. And then what I do is once I go into my reusable block area, I'll download them, which is export as a JSON file, and name them. Like I might name it like contact page header that I might use on a bunch of different websites. And then when I start a new website project, I could just go and import it. So it's just like the premises of saving out templates with page builders. You can use them on different pages and you can use them on different websites, and the way global works is pretty much identical. All right, so I'm already at like 26 minutes. There's so much you could do, but I just want to give you an idea of how the blocks work. And so like if I go down here and I click off of any content and go back up to the block navigation, you see it's going to show basically all the main elements on the page. There's a container, which is this header. There's that reusable block, a container, and a paragraph. And then if I click on the container, then the navigation is going to switch to just what's in that container. So think of, when you're building it out, think of you don't always have to wrap something in a container. If you were doing a blog post and you just wanted to add headlines and text, you could probably just start with a headline and then some paragraph text. If you really wanted to get some padding on the top and bottom, you could always just add some top padding to the headline. But I found just putting everything in a container gives you more kind of control. And then anytime you want to use columns, you're definitely going to want to use a grid. And like I said, take advantage of those horizontal and vertical gaps, and obviously adjust them for each device. The way I see it is I try and only use, like on containers, I use my padding to get top and bottom, and also to any row that's just on white, I'll use top and bottom padding to get some spacing between content. And then what I do is I use the grid, I use that horizontal gap and the vertical gap to create consistent spacing on desktop and then also on mobile. And by doing that, I've noticed I don't ever have to adjust the padding or the margin on the interior elements, which would be like the inside containers on each column, the headline, stuff like that. If you get a good system going with using the container and the grid to control your padding and spacing, it'll not only look better, but it'll help you to keep consistent spacing across your whole site. Because once you get into the lower levels, like, I tweaked the padding on this headline and I may have added a little padding on this button, and then you'll realize as you go through the site that things aren't the same. All right, so what else can I share really quick? You could definitely use, let me release this guy from, you can use the background gradient also to get some shapes. You can basically, I'll do this first. As far as like adding a little bit of leveling and layering. So I'm set that to 50. Let's say I set this to a light gray color and set that to 50. All right, so I set this background gradient at 180 degrees, which is top to bottom, and I went from white to gray, but I set it both at 50, so it's going to give it this hard line. And what that does is, get a new preview going, it'll give you a little bit of variation to where some of your content overlaps, which is always cool. Like if you've seen email sign-up forms that are kind of start off on white and then they overhang on a color, you can do that. Another way to create a little bit of layering is if you have a headline, a container with a background photo, I could go ahead and change cover, which is full width. I could change it to like a certain width, like say 1,000 pixels. And I could position it, instead of sitting in the middle, I could position it to like top right, which would make it sit in the top right corner. And when I do something like that, you'll notice the photo now is going to stop here. So it's basically sitting in the top right, and it's only going to extend out 1,000 pixels. So you can get this kind of layered effect, and I'm doing this on a couple of the demo sites I'm building. And it just kind of breaks up the monotony of full width row, everything inside a box. It kind of, I don't know, it gives you a little more depth, I think, to your design. And you could figure out lots of different ways to use it and get creative. Another thing is, if you wanted to, you could click on that gradient, and instead of having it straight, you could actually do some kind of like angled edge like that, kind of similar to the page builder, angled rows, and get this. And I think that looks more interesting with these going across, you know, with some kind of color shape in the background, as opposed to just 3 boxes inside a gray box. So yeah, you can mess around with it and get really creative. I've recreated a whole bunch of page builder layouts I've done with the GenerateBlocks and Gutenberg, and it's no problem. I mean, there's nothing I haven't been able to do. So yeah, I'm at 30 minutes. I'm just going to stop. I hope this helped a little bit. Maybe it'll speed up your learning curve. If you have any questions, I'm in the group a lot. Feel free to ask. But I would just dive in and get started. And I think once you mess around with it for a while, you're going to realize what you can do and start having some fun with it. All right, have a great day.